I fell in my own kitchen on a Tuesday morning in August, and I lay on that cold ceramic tile for almost 7 hours before anyone found me. My son's cell phone rang 31 times. I know the exact number because the hospital kept a log. 31 calls over 3 days, and not once did he answer. When I finally woke up from surgery, my first clear thought was that I wanted to see his face. Instead, I saw Carla's, my neighbor from across the street, asleep in a hospital chair, with her reading glasses still on and a half-eaten granola bar in her lap. She'd been there for 2 days. The second thing I saw was her phone on the tray beside my bed. She'd left it unlocked so I could call anyone I needed. I didn't need to call anyone. The screen had lit up with a notification, and I could see it clearly even without my own glasses. My son's profile. A photo of him and his wife on the deck of a cruise ship, the blue Mediterranean stretched out behind them, champagne glasses raised. The caption read, "Just us, no noise, no obligations, pure freedom." He'd posted it 48 hours after I went into surgery. That's when I stopped making excuses for my son, and that's when everything changed. Before I tell you what happened next, let me tell you about that Tuesday morning. I'd been up since 5:30, the way I always am. At 69, your body stops asking permission before it wakes you. I made coffee, fed my cat, and decided to water the tomato plants on the back porch before the August heat made it unbearable. I remember stepping back inside, reaching for the dish towel on the oven handle. My left heel caught the edge of the kitchen mat, the old braided one I'd had for 15 years. My husband Leonard used to say that mat was a lawsuit waiting to happen. He said it every single time he tripped on the curling edge. He's been gone for 4 years now, and that mat was still there. And then I was on the floor. The pain was immediate and total, my left hip. I knew before I even tried to move that something was badly wrong. I'd left my phone on the kitchen counter, just 3 feet away. I spent 40 minutes working my way across the tile on my elbows to reach it. By the time I got there, my arms were shaking, and I was sweating through my housecoat. I called my son first, voicemail. I called his wife, Lindsay, voicemail. I left a message for each of them, calm as I could manage, explaining what had happened. Then I called 911. The ambulance came in 11 minutes. 2 paramedics, young enough to be my grandchildren, knelt on my kitchen floor and asked questions I could barely track. When they lifted me onto the stretcher, the pain went white. The last thing I remember before the hospital was staring up at the water stain on my kitchen ceiling, shaped like a rabbit, the one Leonard had always meant to fix, and thinking, Carson will be here soon. He wasn't. The surgery was 4.5 hours. Hip replacement, they told me later. Successful, they said, but significant. I'd been unconscious for 3 days when they finally brought me out of sedation. Carla was the first face I saw. She startled awake when I made a sound and was at my side before I could register where I was. Her hair was unwashed. She had sheet marks on her cheek. She'd clearly been sleeping in that chair for more than one night. "You're awake," she said, and the relief on her face was so naked and raw that I felt, for some reason I couldn't name yet, ashamed. A nurse came quickly. A doctor named Dr. Nguyen arrived shortly after. A calm man in his 50s who looked like he'd spent decades explaining difficult things to frighten people. He walked me through the procedure, the recovery timeline, what to expect. I thanked him. After he left, I looked at Carla. "Where is Carson?" I asked. Her jaw tightened the way it does when she's deciding how honest to be. Carla has never been good at hiding what she's thinking. I've known that about her since the morning she appeared at my door 8 years ago, trying not to cry, asking if I had any boxes she could borrow. Her husband had just left. She had 2 small kids and nowhere to go for the week. I gave her boxes. I gave her lunch. I watched her children for 3 days while she figured out her next move. We've been close ever since. "The hospital has been calling," she said carefully, "multiple times, every day. And his phone keeps going to voicemail." I looked at the ceiling. They're on the cruise. Mediterranean. Maybe the ship coverage is. Maude. Her voice was gentle but firm. I need to show you something. I don't have Instagram on my phone. My daughter-in-law set up an account for me 2 Christmases ago, and I never opened the app. But I understood what I was looking at when Carla held her screen toward me. My son, standing on the deck of a ship in a white linen shirt, tan and laughing, his arm around Lindsay. The water behind them was the kind of blue that only exists in travel magazines. The timestamp said the photo had been posted 48 hours ago. The caption, "Just us, no noise, no obligations, pure freedom." I made myself read it again, no obligations. Carla scrolled without me asking. The next photo, Lindsay in a sun hat at what looked like a Greek port, captioning something about authentic taverna food, posted the morning of my surgery. The next, the 2 of them at a candlelit dinner table, glasses of wine, the caption, "This is the life," posted while I was still unconscious. Another, a selfie on a sunset deck. Another, a crowded market somewhere in Italy, Lindsay beaming. How many times did the hospital call? I heard myself ask. 31, I asked the charge nurse. 31 times, over 3 days, to a phone that clearly had enough signal to upload high-resolution photos to the internet every single day. 31 calls that went unanswered while my sons ate fresh seafood somewhere in the Aegean. I handed the phone back. I needed a moment. My chest hurt, not from the surgery, from something older. No obligations. I was the obligation. I had become the thing my son needed a vacation from. I don't know exactly when that happened, but lying in that hospital bed with the machines beeping and the IV pulling at my arm, I started thinking back. 4 years ago, Leonard died, pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. Carson came for the last week. He sat with me at the hospice, held his father's hand, cried with me in the hallway. I was grateful. I thought, whatever complications exist between us, he will always show up when it counts. He left 3 days after the funeral. Big presentation, he said, career-defining. I understood. I always understood. But after that, things shifted in ways I kept explaining away. Visits got shorter. Calls dropped from weekly to monthly, to whenever I get a chance. "Mom, things are just so busy right now. My grandson Jake." 9 years old, with Len's eyes and his grandfather's laugh, I stopped being invited to his school events, his spring concert, his 3rd grade play, his soccer games. "We didn't want you to drive that far alone," Lindsay would say. "It's a lot." As if I hadn't been driving myself everywhere for 69 years. Last Christmas, they spent it with Lindsay's parents in Phoenix. "We alternate years," Carson explained, which was interesting because we had never actually discussed alternating years. The Christmas before that, they'd come but stayed 2 days and left on the 26th citing traffic. The year before, they sent a fruit of the month basket with a note that said, "Thinking of you." I was 40 minutes away. They didn't need to think of me. They could have come. 3 months ago, Carson called about the cruise. 10 days, Mediterranean, 14 ports. Lindsay's parents were going, he said, her brother and his wife. "Big group trip," he said, cheerful. He did not invite me. I congratulated him and hung up and sat in Leonard's armchair for a long time. Even then, I told myself he was overwhelmed. I told myself Lindsay's family planned these things, and it wasn't his fault, and that when the trip was over, we'd have a nice visit. I was wrong. I had been wrong for 4 years. On the 4th day, Carla went to my house to pick up some clothes and my medications. She has a key. She's always had a key. When she came back, she set the bag on the foot of my bed, and then stood there holding something else. An envelope. She looked the way she'd looked 8 years ago, standing at my door, like she was carrying something too heavy and didn't know how to set it down. "This was in your mailbox," she said, mixed in with the regular mail. The return address was a law firm I didn't recognize, Prescott and Weller, LLC. The letter inside was 2 pages, dense with legal language, but the subject line was plain enough: guardianship assessment, preliminary inquiry. My name was in the first paragraph, So was Carson's. So was a phrase that made the room go cold. Cognitive capacity evaluation. I read further. The letter referenced a forthcoming petition for limited guardianship to be filed with the county probate court. It referenced documented concerns about my ability to manage my own affairs, my finances, my household. It referenced supporting statements to be gathered from individuals familiar with the subject's daily functioning. I put the letter down, picked it up again, read it a third time. Then I called Patsy. Patsy is my closest friend from church. We've shared the same pew for 12 years. She's 72 and sharper than most people, half her age. She answered on the second ring, and I could tell by how her voice changed when she heard mine that she already knew something had happened. "Carson called you," I said. Not a question. A pause, about 2 weeks ago. "What did he ask?" Another pause. He asked if I'd noticed you seeming off lately, his word. If you seemed confused about dates, if you repeated yourself, if you seemed like you were struggling. "What did you tell him?" I told him absolutely not, that you were the sharpest person I knew, and that if he was genuinely concerned about your well-being, he might try calling you more than once a month. Her voice had gone tight. He asked me to keep the conversation between us. Said he didn't want to worry you. I thought he was being overly cautious. I should have told you, Maude. I'm sorry. I called my neighbor Betty next. Same story, almost word for word. Carson had called her the week before the cruise. Same questions. Had I seemed forgetful? Had there been any incidents? Was I managing the house on my own? Betty had told him I was fine, more than fine, that I'd helped her carry in her groceries just the week before. He thanked her and asked her to keep the conversation private. He had been calling people, gathering testimony, building a record that would say his mother was declining, confused, unsafe to be left on her own, all so he could petition a court for control of my affairs. And then he left for a 10-day cruise. If you believe that family should be there when it counts, type 1 in the comments. If you've ever discovered that someone you loved was working against you in secret, type 2. And if you believe it is never too late to protect yourself, type 3. Your comment matters more than you know. I need to know you're still with me, because what Carla found next, what was folded inside that envelope, was the part that turned my sadness into something else entirely. There was a second document tucked behind the letter, a financial disclosure form, pre-filled. It listed my home, Leonard's and my home, where we'd lived for 33 years, as a primary asset to be placed under managed oversight pending the guardianship petition. It listed my savings accounts, Leonard's life insurance payout, my retirement fund, everything. My son hadn't been worried about my safety. He had been counting what I was worth. That night, after Carla went home to sleep in an actual bed for the first time in 4 days, I lay alone in the dark and made a decision. Carson thought he had time. He thought I was here, confused and declining, easy to manage. He had no idea that his mother had spent 33 years running a household, raising a child, managing finances, and handling hard things, mostly without anyone's help. He had underestimated me. That was his mistake. The next morning, I called Miss Aniston. She had been Leonard's and my attorney for 19 years. When I explained what had happened, the surgery, the 31 unanswered calls, the guardianship inquiry, the financial form, I heard the particular silence of someone choosing their words with care. "I've seen this before," she said finally. "Adult children who get impatient." What are my options? Complete ones, let's start. We spent 2 hours on the phone. By the end, my will had been rewritten from the ground up. To Jake, my grandson, who had no part in any of this, I left a trust fund of $80,000, designated for education only, managed entirely by Ms. Aniston until he turned 21. His parents would have no access, no oversight, not a single dollar. To Carla, I left $40,000, not because she expected it, or because I owed her a debt. but because she had spent 4 nights sleeping in a hospital chair for me, and because some things need to be named plainly. To my church's food pantry program, $25,000. To Carson and Lindsay, a letter. Just a letter. I kept enough to live on comfortably, and for the first time in 4 years, I felt like myself. Carson called on the 8th day. I watched his name light up my screen and let it ring twice before I answered. Mom. Breathless, rushed, the performance of panic. Mom, I just saw all the messages. I am so sorry, the ship had absolutely terrible service. We were basically offline the whole trip. Carson. My voice was steady. I'd had 8 days to practice. You posted photos every day. The taverna in Greece, the sunset dinner, the market in Positano. Silence. Those were. Lindsay scheduled those ahead of time. The app posts automatically. We weren't actually. The hospital called 31 times. A different kind of silence, heavier. I need you to come Thursday, I said. 2 o'clock. Miss Aniston's office. Estate matters. He recovered too quickly. Of course. Whatever you need, we'll be there. They arrived 10 minutes early. I noticed that. When there's something in it for them, they're early. Carson wore a dark suit. Lindsay wore a gray blazer, heels on a Tuesday afternoon, hair done. They walked in looking composed and prepared, like people attending a business meeting, which, in their minds, I suppose they were. They stopped when they saw Carla sitting beside me. What is she doing here? Lindsay asked. Polite enough, but her eyes were calculating. Carla is here at my request, I said. Sit down. They sat. Miss Aniston sat at the head of the table with a closed folder in front of her. Across from us, my son and his wife arranged themselves with the stillness of people waiting to hear good news. Before we discuss the estate, I said, I need to say a few things. Carson leaned forward. Mom, if this is about the cruise, I already. The hospital called you 31 times. I let that sit for a moment. You had cellular service every day. I know this because you posted photos every day. I am not asking you to explain that. I'm simply saying it out loud, so we both know I know. Lindsay opened her mouth. I held up my hand. 2 weeks before my accident, you called Patsy. You called Betty. You asked both of them whether I seemed confused, forgetful, disoriented. You asked them to keep those conversations private. I slid the guardianship letter across the table. And you began this. Carson looked at the paper. Something moved across his face. Not guilt. Recalculation. That was purely precautionary. You're living alone. You're not. You were cataloging my assets. I pointed to the financial disclosure form. This form lists my house, Leonard's insurance payout, my retirement savings. That is not a welfare check, Carson. That is inventory. The room went quiet. The clock on Miss Aniston's wall ticked. We wanted to be responsible, Lindsay said, softer now, to make sure everything was protected. Whose protection? I asked, genuinely. No answer. Leonard died 4 years ago, I said. You stayed 3 days. Then you left, and I handled everything that came after. The paperwork, his belongings, the accounts, the house, alone. I managed. You know this because you were present for almost none of it. I looked at my son. I asked to come to Jake's spring concert last year. You said the drive was too far for me. I offered to fly. You said it would be too complicated. I paused. I have not seen my grandson in 7 months. We've been busy. I know, very busy. Busy enough to post photos every day while I was in surgery. I took a slow breath. I spent 4 years making excuses for you. I don't have the energy to do it anymore. I nodded to Ms. Aniston. She opened the folder. The trust for Jake, controlled by her, inaccessible to his parents. The $40,000 to Carla, which made Carson's head turn sharply. The church donation. And then the final clause, a letter addressed to Carson, sealed, to be delivered upon my death, with no monetary bequest attached. Lindsay was the first to find her voice. You can't do this. You just had major surgery. You're not thinking clearly. Mrs. Palmer had a full cognitive evaluation conducted by 2 independent physicians last week, Ms. Aniston said, sliding a document across the table. Official letterhead. She passed with no concerns noted. This will is properly witnessed and legally sound. You're welcome to contest it. I'd estimate $40,000 in legal fees, and no different outcome. Carson stood. His chair scraped hard against the floor. This is because of her. He pointed at Carla. She's been in your ear. Carla slept in a hospital chair for 4 nights, I said. She did not ask me for a single thing. She didn't know about any of this until this morning. I looked at my son, really looked at him, maybe for the first time in years. You filed a guardianship petition from a cruise ship. Don't talk to me about influence. He had nothing to say to that. Lindsay tried one more time, her voice measured now, searching for steady ground. You'll regret this, Maude. When you're older and things get harder, you'll need us. I thought about that for a moment. I needed you 3 weeks ago, I said quietly. I was on my kitchen floor for 7 hours. I needed you on day 1 in that hospital, and day 2, and day 3. I needed you when your father died and I was alone with 33 years of shared life to sort through. I needed you at Jake's school events. I needed you at Christmas. I stood carefully, steadying myself. You were never there when I needed you. So no, I don't think I'll be calling on you when things get harder. They left without saying goodbye. That was 3 months ago. I sold the house in September. 33 years of memories, and I walked away with a lightness I hadn't expected. A small apartment near Carla, near the church, near the physical therapy clinic, where I go 3 mornings a week, and where the woman at the front desk has started saving me the good parking space. My hip is healing. Dr. Nguyen says my recovery is ahead of schedule for someone my age. I think stubbornness is better medicine than anything he can prescribe. Carson has called twice since then. The first time, angry. The second time, conciliatory in a way that felt rehearsed. I listened to both calls. I didn't promise him anything. Jake called me last Sunday on his mother's phone. She doesn't know he does this. He's 9 years old and he figured out how to call his grandmother on his own, which tells me everything I need to know about that child's character. We talked for 40 minutes about his soccer team and a book he's reading about space and whether I thought cats or dogs were smarter. I said, cats, obviously. He laughed exactly like his grandfather. He's coming to visit in 2 weeks. Carla is going to teach him to make her tamales. I'm taking him to the Natural History Museum, which he has been asking to see for a year. I'm also, and this still surprises me every time I say it, planning a trip, solo. Something I have never done in my life. 10 days in New England this fall, when the leaves are turning. I bought the train ticket and I stared at it for a long time before I believed it was real. 69 years old, hip still healing, first solo trip of my life. I keep coming back to something Carla said to me in the hospital on the second night when things felt very heavy. She said, Maude, the people who love you show up. That's the whole definition. Everything else is just words. She's right. I spent 4 years collecting words, explanations, excuses, promises of better timing, declarations of love that arrived without any of love's actual weight. I'm done with words. Show up or don't, but don't expect me to pretend the absence isn't real. If someone listening to this recognizes something of themselves in my story, if you have been making excuses for someone who keeps failing to appear, if you have been shrinking yourself down to make their absence more comfortable, if you have been calling it love when really it's just habit and hope, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to change the terms. You are allowed to grieve the person you wished they were, and then put that grief down and walk away from it. I didn't lose my son when I changed my will. I lost him years before that, one small choice at a time, while I was still telling myself the story of the son I wished he was. The difference is that now I've stopped telling that story. And the one I'm living instead, the one with Carla and Jake's phone calls and tamales and a train ticket to Vermont, That story is mine, completely and finally mine.